This video takes us back to an early world that feels very different from the New York we know today. Instead of modern photos, we're using original paintings and engravings created hundreds of years ago. These images were made by artists who actually stood in those streets, near those rivers, and carefully recorded what they saw around them. Their artwork gives us a window into the past. By combining these historic images with modern reconstruction tools, we can imagine what New York looked and felt like long before it became a busy modern city filled with skyscrapers. We can almost hear the sounds, feel the weather, and sense the slower rhythm of life. Let's begin our journey in Manhattan in the year 1746. As we cross the East River into Manhattan, the atmosphere changes immediately. In 1746, the ferry landing at the foot of Wall Street was one of the busiest and most important places in the city. At that time, Wall Street did not end among tall buildings like today. Instead, it led directly to the river. The ferry connected Manhattan and Brooklyn, and people were constantly traveling back and forth. Merchants carried goods such as food, cloth, and tools. Travelers arrived on horseback. Sailors tied their boats along the wooden docks. The waterfront was full of movement and noise. In the image, we can see a small pavilion where passengers waited for the next ferry to arrive. Behind it stand buildings that still reflect the old Dutch style from the earlier days of New Amsterdam. The architecture is simple, practical, and close to the ground. These buildings remind us that New York was once a small colonial settlement shaped by European influence. Now, let us move to Brooklyn during a cold winter morning in 1760. At this time, Brooklyn was not a crowded city. It was mostly rural countryside. Families lived in small wooden houses surrounded by open fields, barns, and narrow dirt roads. Life here followed the seasons, especially the demands of farming. When winter arrived, everything slowed down. Snow covered the ground, and the air felt sharp and cold. In this scene, people are cutting wood for fire, gathering supplies, and talking quietly in small groups. Children play near the roadside, enjoying the snow. A horse stands calmly beside a sled, waiting to be used for transport. The houses are modest and built low to the ground. Smoke rises gently from the chimneys as families try to keep warm inside. Brooklyn at this time was shaped by agriculture. Most families grew their own food, kept animals, and traded with nearby towns when necessary. A winter day meant staying close to home, preparing meals, repairing tools, and doing whatever work was needed to survive the cold months. Life was simple, but it required constant effort. By 1763, New York had changed again. The British firmly controlled the city, and New York was becoming an important colonial port. At the southern tip of Manhattan stood Fort George. This fort played a key role in protecting the harbor and maintaining British authority. In the image, ships of many sizes sail into the harbor. Some are merchant ships carrying goods across the Atlantic. Others belong to the British Navy, guarding the waters. The harbor was the heart of the city's economy. Trade brought wealth and connected New York to the wider world. Fort George sits close to the shoreline, its cannons aimed toward the water. The British flag flies clearly above it, showing who controlled the city. The presence of soldiers and warships reminds us that this was not only a place of trade, but also a strategic military location. As we move farther north, the city becomes quiet once again. In 1765, Harlem looked nothing like it does today. Instead of tall buildings and busy streets, it was mostly farmland and open landscape. Small houses were scattered across rolling fields, separated by wide stretches of grass and trees. In the painting, a few small boats float peacefully on the water. Families likely use them for fishing or short travel along the rivers.
Behind the houses, thick forests stretch across the land, looking untouched and wild. The entire area feels calm and slow. Manhattan at this time was not a dense city. It was a mixture of busy waterfront activity in the south and peaceful countryside in the north. If you imagined standing there in the 1760s, you would not hear traffic or see towering skyscrapers. Instead, you would hear wind moving through trees, the distant sounds of animals, and the quiet rhythm of everyday colonial life. This was New York before it became the powerful city we recognize today, a place of ferries, farms, forts, and small wooden homes, slowly growing into something much larger. Today, it is hard to imagine that large parts of Manhattan were once quiet countryside. When we think of New York now, we picture tall skyscrapers, crowded streets, and constant noise. But in the mid-1700s, much of the island, especially in the north, was still rural and peaceful. In places like Harlem, families worked on farms, raised animals, and lived far away from the busy harbor in lower Manhattan. Life moved at a slower pace. The sounds people heard were not carriage wheels on stone roads or shouting merchants, but wind moving through trees, animals in the fields, and neighbors speaking quietly outside their homes. Development had not yet reached this far north. The city ended much farther south, and beyond it was open land.
But only a decade later, everything began to change. By 1775, the calm feeling of earlier years had disappeared. The harbor was now intense, crowded, and full of activity. Ships were constantly being built, repaired, and loaded with goods. Workers filled the docks from morning until night. British soldiers stood beside sailors and merchants. Crates of supplies moved between warehouses and ships without stopping. This was the beginning of the American Revolution, and tension filled the air. New York's location made it extremely valuable. Whoever controlled its harbor controlled one of the most important ports in North America. The British understood this. So did the American colonists. In the images from this time, you can see many types of boats in the water. Large merchant ships sit anchored in the harbor. Smaller rowboats move people and cargo back and forth between shore and ship. The shoreline is lined with warehouses, workshops, and busy wharves. It is no longer a quiet colonial town. It is becoming something much bigger. In that same year, New York also played an important role in communication between the colonies. One of the city's early postal buildings helped improve how news traveled across America. Under the organization of Benjamin Franklin, postal routes became more structured and reliable. At that time, fast communication was still a new idea. Letters could take days or even weeks to arrive. Newspapers were printed less frequently and often arrived late. But the growing postal system changed everything. Information began moving more predictably between colonies. Political writings, news about British decisions, and reports from other cities all passed through New York. The post office quietly helped spread the ideas that fueled the revolution. Words became just as powerful as weapons. By 1776, New York was no longer just a small colonial settlement. It had grown into a large and active town with busy wharves, rows of homes, multiple churches, and constant movement along the waterfront. Ships filled the harbor. Houses stood closer together. The shoreline looked more organized and developed than it had in earlier decades. This was the moment when New York truly began to look like a major city. The year 1776 was important for another reason. The Declaration of Independence was signed, and the colonies officially declared themselves free from British rule. War was no longer just a possibility, it was reality. Because of its size and location, New York became a major target. Both the British and the American forces wanted control of the city.
It was too valuable to ignore. After the Battle of Long Island, the British captured New York. They would hold the city from 1776 until 1783, for most of the Revolutionary War. The occupation changed daily life completely. In the images from this period, British soldiers march through the streets in organized lines. Officers ride on horseback. Civilians stand quietly on the sidewalks, watching carefully. The streets appear calm, but beneath that calm surface there must have been fear, uncertainty, and tension. During the occupation, large fires destroyed parts of the city. Supplies sometimes became limited. Families were forced to choose sides, support the British, support the revolution, or stay silent to survive. Spies moved secretly through the streets. Prisoners were held in harsh conditions. Political decisions shaped everyday life. For 7 years, New Yorkers lived under foreign military control. When the war finally ended in 1783 and the British left, the city was not the same. It had changed physically, buildings damaged, neighborhoods altered, but it had also changed emotionally. The people who lived there had experienced uncertainty, loss, and transformation. Yet the end of occupation also marked a new beginning. These early images show a side of New York that most people rarely imagine: snow-covered villages, quiet farmland, busy colonial docks, and crowded wooden streets. A place shaped not by skyscrapers, but by ordinary people living through extraordinary change. By the end of the Revolution, New York was ready to grow into a new role. It would soon become the temporary capital of the United States and later develop into one of the greatest port cities in the world. This early history reminds us that New York has always been shaped by movement, trade, conflict, and community. Even in the 1700s, the city was already becoming something larger than itself. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this journey into New York before it became the city we know today.